Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics.
All right, we're here with Professor Steve Saideman from Carleton University, and he's our resident NATO expert. And the Secretary General of NATO was in Canada this week, especially to visit Cambridge Bay and some of the radar stations in the north. So I figured I would get Steve to kind of give us a rundown about what this means in the bigger picture. Steve.
Thanks for having me again, Dale. Always a pleasure to be here. Um, I think we get the Secretary General coming to Canada every once in a while because he visits all members of NATO. And it was a little different that it was Arctic focused, which hadn't been the case in the past. And part of that is on us, of that we have tried to define the Arctic as being a Canadian problem, not a NATO problem. That we don't want to have other countries telling us what to do in our part of the Arctic. Um, that assertion of sovereignty has meant it's a NATO, it's a Canadian thing and maybe a NORAD thing. Um, but with Russia doing what Russia's been doing the past 6 months or 8 years, depending how you count, there's obviously greater interest in concert against all Russian threats.
Mhm. I also was noticing that they were talking about with Finland and Sweden becoming members. That means like near NATO is becoming a much more Arctic focused alliance as well.
We've got everybody in the Arctic Council except for Russia is now in NATO, and I don't think Russia is getting into NATO anytime too soon.
No.
Um, so there's that. There's also just the fact that Russia is increasingly obnoxious in the world. And so I think that that's driving a lot of this. Canada does have something to show, like announcements about what we're going to do to improve the NORAD warning systems in the high north. Um, I don't think Canada's ever counted that really as a contribution to NATO, although in the math of 2% it does count.
Okay.
Because what we spend on our defense is that stuff.
Yeah.
But to have the Secretary General go, "Hey, you guys are spending NORAD, that isn't that great?" That helps this government justify the tremendous amount of money it's going to take to improve those warning systems. So there's
Yeah.
that.
And that is something that Anita Anon has been focused on, it seems, a fair amount the last few months.
Not just her predecessor, who I accused many times of not doing his job. This was a focal point. They were organizing or assisting events in Ottawa, trying to generate public support, particularly amongst the chattering class or the Ottawa bubble, whatever you want to call us, on NORAD modernization. This is a long time in coming. And so it proceeded, it was part of our mandate. And they're putting an effort into it. They are spending money on it. There's debates about how much of this is new money and not new money. But I think there's going to be a fair amount of new money spent, if not right now, then, in the years ahead, because this is a long-term project.
Mm-hmm.
Operating in the North is expensive and requires a lot of work, including coordination with people of the North. And I think this government has done a pretty good job of having that conversation with the various peoples of the North to talk about how this is going to go and try to get them to buy in. And there are folks on my Twitter feed were noting that there's been a lot of progress made on war advisories and other things. So we're doing a bit better job on the infrastructure in the North, and obviously we could do better still.
Okay. I mean, this government has been asserting sovereignty in the North by way of Inuit people much more, I think, than previous governments in the past have. And I think that's kind of an interesting shift.
Well, sovereignty is really about people more than anything else. Can you prove you own the territory? Are you doing stuff with it? And that's really been the greatest thing going on here in terms of the most important thing going on here, I should say, because, and here's where I'll do you a favor of pouring cold water on this whole Russia stuff. Sovereignty is not really about defending Canada from the Russians. Um, they could seize an island sometime by dropping some paratroopers on them, and it would take us weeks to respond, and that response would be a rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, People point to the fact that the Russians are spending tremendous amounts of money on their Arctic, and that makes complete sense. Sorry, because just as we're having people want to sail through our Northwest Passage, and that's where our difference with the United States is. We consider our own waters, and the Americans think it's an international strait. The Russians have the same thing, but more so, which is that there's going to be a lot more ships using the waters above Russia, going from Europe to Asia and Asia to Europe, than using the water from the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage is not as navigable, and it's not international shipping.
Yeah.
And the Russians, unlike us, have a history of being invaded on a regular basis. And suddenly that fourth quadrant of their country that was always seen as being super secure is not. So they're putting a lot of money in their Arctic. And guess what? It's super expensive for them to operate in the Arctic. So if they want to throw a lot of money at their Arctic, the answer is let them. It's money that they can't spend on, I don't know, being well prepared to invade Ukraine. So we should invest in our people in the Arctic. We probably should invest in some defensive capabilities in the Arctic, but we should not be panicked about the Russian threat in the Arctic. We should not be panicked about the Chinese threat in the Arctic. China has a lot of other fish to fry than occupying our north. Although I will say, last week we had a summer institute that my network runs, the Canadian Defense and Security Network, and in the simulation, the Chinese won by getting, partly by getting to rescue a scientific ship in the far north faster than the Canadians or Americans could get there. But that's a game. It's not reality. I don't think we have that much to worry about the Chinese in the medium term. They are that way. We do have much to worry about the Chinese in terms of buying up mining firms in Canada and other, their espionage, their penetration, their various things they're doing in Canada. But I don't think that they're going to be a tremendous conventional threat in the Arctic.
Okay. Well, that's always good perspective to have, because there has been, I think, some hysterical talk in the last couple of weeks about, Russia could invade our Arctic. And I always think back to what you were saying in a previous conversation about, they haven't been able to supply Ukraine, and it's right next door, or their troops in Ukraine, and they're right next door. So
I think one of the concerns right now is that Russia might be ahead of the United States on hypersonic missiles, or at the same rate with hypersonic missiles. And so people are worried about what happens if the Russians, launch hypersonic missiles from the north. And this will sound incredibly cynical, but it means that we'll die faster than we would have during the Cold War. But the outcome would be mostly the same, because the United States does not have a robust capability to shoot down all missiles coming from the Russians.
Yeah.
They don't have that now. They never did. We've always been vulnerable to Russian ICBMs ever since the Russians had them. So how does this really change the game? I'm not really sure it changes that much. I don't think it changes the strategic picture that much, because we still have mutual assured destruction. The Russian hypersonic ability cannot take out the American second strike capability. The Chinese hypersonic capability cannot do that. Might make things a little hairier, but the Chinese and the Russians would still have to worry about an overwhelming second strike by the United States, and that would then, of course, deter that first strike. So we would have less warning time, because hypersonic means faster.
Yeah.
But it's not going to change our vulnerability. We've always been vulnerable, and we always will be vulnerable, because nobody's really shown an ability to develop a really robust anti-ballistic missile defense system. The Americans still don't have it. So, and that's what, 30, almost 40 years since Reagan's Star Wars speech.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And just shifting topics a little bit, we're now in 6 months of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I just kind of wanted to get your lay of the land about what this is kind of, what we're seeing and what it's signaling.
Well, there's a lot going on here. That the Ukrainians have shown a tremendous ability to not just stand their ground, but to assimilate the new weapon systems and use them in very intelligent ways. So the Russians still haven't cleaned up their logistics. They still keep on putting all their ammo in, big caches, which then the Ukrainians spot and destroy with the newly gained HIMARS weapon system for the United States.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the battle of wits, I think the Ukrainians are still winning the battle of wits. In terms of their ability to sustain, it's really hard because we have a better idea of what the Russian casualties are than the Ukrainian casualties. Uh, I do think that it does appear to be the case that Russian morale continues to spiral downwards. There was a really good piece online about this one paratrooper, Russian paratrooper, who documented what was life like for a Russian paratrooper
I did see
before the
that.
war, and then what happened during the war. So, their life was miserable, really miserable before the fighting even started. So you can only imagine what Russian was like. Who recently announced they want to, bring another 100,000 troops into the Russian armed forces, which would basically replace the 100,000 they lost. That's about the number that we've seen lately is around 80,000.
Hmm.
So again, think about Russia. A significant percentage of its military capability, somewhere between one quarter, one third, maybe more than that, in this war. So in terms of where the war stands now, there are questions about whether the Ukrainians are going to go on the offensive or not. Offensives are risky, so they've been very, very smart about being cautious about it, and they won't announce it ahead of time. They'll figure out time and place they're choosing.
Hmm.
I don't have any confidence the Russians have much of a learning curve in all of this, that they will continue to use as much force as possible to generate costs to the Ukrainians. But I don't see them do anything clever to beat the Ukrainian defenses. So this is going to go on. And one recognition of how long this is going to go on is in the last few weeks, Canada announced that it would be giving Operation Unifier again. That since
Yeah.
2015, Canadians had troops in Ukraine training Ukrainian soldiers. We like to take a lot of credit for the Ukrainian military performance. I think we helped, but obviously Ukrainians own most of the responsibility.
Yeah.
But what was announced a couple of weeks ago is that training is going to start again, but in the UK. That is that the Ukrainians are going to send their troops to Britain. We have already sent something like 200 trainers to Britain, and these are going to take the next generation of Ukrainian fighters. So they're people in basic training essentially,
Yeah.
and giving them the skills they need to be better fighters. And you only do that if you think that the war is going to go on. You don't do that if you think the war is going to last another week. And so I think people are starting to realize this thing can go on and on and on. The Iran-Iraq war went on for roughly 8 years. And that was the last time we had a long slugfest between two relatively pure conventional military campaign. So I'm not saying this is going to last 8 years, but if somebody were to say, is this going to last another 6 months, I would bet the over on that. I think this is going to last longer. And that speaks to the international ramifications, because that means that fuel prices are not going to drop as fast as they might otherwise, although they have been dropping. And more importantly, food prices are probably not going to drop.
Yeah.
You've been documenting quite well what climate change has done to food prices. There has been some movement on this in Ukraine of their ability to get some of their grain out in different ways. So that point of the crisis may not be as severe as it could be, but the energy situation in Europe in the winter is going to become pretty dire.
Yeah.
And you have been documenting quite well that we can't magically ship lots of natural gas from the middle of Canada to the middle of Europe, since we don't have any infrastructure in between. So Europe is in trouble. And we're now starting to see the Germans finally decide, oh, wait, we have the nuclear power plants that we were going to shut down because we were overreacting to the events of Fukushima.
Yeah.
Now they may keep them open, which would make them less dependent on Russian energy supplies.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. I always appreciate being able to talk to you. And we'll do this again soon.
My pleasure, Dale.
All right. Thanks.
That's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.